General sense. No, I don't have to. I can say
So where you can do it.
So, have you heard on the Florence refinery? I'll probably get the same email. I asked staff a week ago. I'm like, hey, is it? You don't want all the money for yourselves?
I know.
So I you're talking staff, or is that what you're talking about? No, I have not heard anybody else my request of, well, how far off are we on this? It seems reasonable to me. I like to, what's our patent response rate on it? We're looking into it, okay, fine, I don't know what it is.
I guess what you can do on other business, say,
I'm gonna bring it up, but yeah, but I haven't heard anything back, so.
you can't have a subsequent conversation because it wasn't agendized. Right. I think it's a good idea.
Get your responses. I'm glad you're going down there.
Yeah. Plan was made up like 3 months ago.
Oh, okay.
Jean's just out,
You might be more interested than what kind of shield do you need to take?
Oh, they love me. I was trying to help them out. I'm ready. Where's the gavel?
They never give me a gavel. Are we ready?
Don't use my phone.
All right.
Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, how are you?
Okay.
Sean should be on video.
We have a forum with Judith. Yeah. I'm gonna get Judith to sit.
You to sit down?
Well, I'm not gonna say it. Ask me to join us.
Technically, we need 4 for 4.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, but it's an action item. So the information
Yeah.
it's only the voting.
Don't need 4.
We don't need 4?
No, not for this.
I thought it was
Not for an action item?
The only thing that needs 4 is for the ledge committee to take an interim position before the board takes on.
So it's just the members present?
3, well, no, 3. You need 3 to take an.
There's 6 members of this committee.
I know, but the rule says that the rules provide that a quorum is 3.
Really? That's crazy. Okay.
Hey, you okay with me asking about the Florence refinery, the emails we've all been getting, where staff is at with that?
Under other
We're
business.
reviewing it right now. Get the recommendations.
I'd like to bring it up during the meeting. But since we're sending Joe down there.
I'm actually meeting with those community members today. This afternoon, so it'll be good.
I'd like Joe to be able to say that, yes, Vice Chair Benoit brought it up when he was
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we want to get this started so we don't run late again. Keep getting in trouble at home. Not really. All right, I'd like to call the Stationary Source Committee to order. And we'll go into our first item, the Home Rule Advisory Group membership.
As the chair of Home Rule Advisory Group, I would move this item and waive staff presentation.
I'll second it.
I have a first and second. Any opposed?
Oh, we have
Sean?
Supervisor Nelson, we have to take a roll call
Yeah,
vote.
we'll do a roll call vote then.
Dr. Luke?
Aye.
Aye. You just spoke for me, Supervisor.
I beat you to it, there's a delay.
Okay, Dr. Liu,
Aye.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
and Supervisor Nelson,
Yes?
and Councilmember Benoit.
Aye. All right, on to our informational item, our 2015 annual report on AB 2588 air toxics. Very good. Go ahead.
All
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Ian McMillan. I'm a planning and rules manager with the planning group over AB 2588 CEQA and the annual emissions report. This is a fairly routine report this morning. It comes to you all every year. It's required to have a public hearing for the health and safety code. We were just before you about 6 months ago for the 2014 report, or 7 months ago for the 2014 report. We're back with the 2015 report. So the information that's in here is for the 2015 year. It might be a little outdated by the time we get to it, but that happens every single year. So. All right, so AB 2588, just a quick bit of background. This was enacted in 1987, modified in 1992. We implement it through our own Rule 1402. The goal of the Act is to collect emissions data, identify those facilities that might have an impact on their surrounding community, determine what the potential health risks are, and then move into some additional stages such as public notification or risk reduction activities. As I just mentioned, this does require a public hearing. The main focus of the core program of AB 2588 is to really, it's kind of focused on this emissions inventory gathering that's done every 4 years for facilities, and not every facility, or it's not that all facilities report every 4 years and 3 years of nothing. It's they cycle through every year. So about a quarter of the facilities report every year. Once those emissions are reported to us, the toxic emissions, we go through a prioritization procedure, a screening procedure, to determine if further steps are needed in the evaluation. This would include an air toxics inventory report, which is a much more detailed look at the emissions and how they are released from the facility. We would then move into a health risk assessment, which looks at how those emissions are released. That's plugged into a computer model, which then determines what the concentrations of those pollutants are out in the community, and then we go through some calculations to determine what the potential health risks are. Just last year, there was an update to this health risk assessment methodology from OWIHA, which was rather significant and really increased the health risks. And it's at this stage, at the health risk assessment stage, that comes into effect. If those health risks from that HRA are found to be above certain thresholds in our Rule 1402, then a facility must go into public notification. And for example, if that's a cancer risk of 10 in a million, then they might need to go into notification. If the cancer risk is, say, 25 in a million, they would need to go into risk reduction activities. So when we look at our core program, again, it all starts with the quadrennial reporting. This is all done through our annual emissions report software. Now all those emissions are viewable on our Find web tool. About a little bit more than 1,600 facilities have been in the core program since 1987. Some facilities cycle in and out depending on what their emissions profile is, if they go into business, out of business, split facilities, that sort of thing. 361, or I'm sorry, that number is actually a little outdated, 361. It's 346 facilities are actually currently submitting their quadrennial emissions inventories, and 140 of those submitted in 2015. As I mentioned before, once you have the quadrennial emissions reports, then facilities go on to the prioritization stage. A couple quick notes here. There will be some streamlining provisions that are being considered or are being proposed, and that will come back to the board later on this year. One of those will include a look at the prioritization procedure that we have here at the district, to really try to just look at streamlining, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. The CAPCOA also has its own prioritization procedure guidance. They have been updating their prioritization procedures, and a lot of this activity, again, is based on the new OWIHA guidance and how to implement that. So if we look, again, historically, again, I apologize, there's one more typo on this slide, last one, I promise, where we say 339 facilities. There's actually 339 HRAs have been approved. That's only 307 facilities. Some facilities have to do multiple HRAs through time. So a total of 339 HRAs have been approved since program inception. As we see in that pie chart on the right, about 95% of those HRAs show that the risks are below public notification levels. And so there's only a small handful that would be above public notification and even into risk reduction. The risk reduction, that little red bar in the pie chart, that number typically stays small. Facilities go through risk reduction, then they drop out, and maybe one more pops in every year or every few years.
As we see, a little bit more than 50 facilities have conducted public notification, and 25 have implemented or are currently implementing risk reduction. In the 2015 year, there are some of the core facilities. We have a list here of the different facilities that were being worked on with the various work products, whether they're air toxics inventory reports, health risk assessments, risk reduction plans. There's other activities that go on related to AB 2588, such as source testing or fence line air monitoring to help really understand the toxic emissions. You can see the list of facilities there. Some of these facilities have subsequently had additional reports approved in 2016. For example, I'll note here, Cameco, they actually recently had their health risk assessment approved. We are going to a public notification meeting next week. The notification letters have gone out for that facility, and they will be moving into risk reduction as their next step as well. So for upcoming activities, I did mention that there's some streamlining provisions and voluntary early risk reduction that's been presented to this committee previously. Staff is working on that currently. Again, trying to look at how to shorten the timelines. There's some inherent timelines that are lengthy just per health and safety code and just the amount of time needed to conduct the work, but we're trying to see where we can shorten that wherever possible. And we'll be bringing that back to board. And then there was an RFP that was recently approved, or a contract that was recently approved to develop a protocol for looking at when there is this fence line monitoring and how do we reconcile that with computer models. And that was just recently brought to you all a month or so ago. Mm-hmm. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Very good. Any board member questions? Any public comment? No?
I have one. When you talk about like fence line monitoring and looking at these low cost air quality sensors and we know we can get them to measure PM 2.5 and get them to measure maybe ozone. You know, the question all the community members have is can we get something that measures toxics? And then my question on top of that is if we do, how do we actually interpret the data that would be provided to them in a way that's meaningful and helpful?
Sure. I think, and the experience we've had so far, most of the facilities that this has come up is, it's been metal emissions. That's where it just come up recently. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that gaseous emissions wouldn't be future consideration. Also, yeah. You know, so whether it's hexavalent chromium or maybe arsenic or some other pollutant like that, typically the concern is with longer term health risks. And so that actually helps out a little bit when thinking of analyzing the data. You don't have to worry about a single spurious hour that has some odd value, and you really have to interpret it. You can say, I can look at an annual average, and that smooths out some of that. You don't have to worry about some of that play. But there are some pollutants where we will need to look at that. And this protocol development, part of that is to look at how do we think about the monitoring data, the quality of that data that comes in, comparing that to the quality of the data coming out of the model, and making sure that they match together. One of the challenges we're also addressing in these public notification meetings, and this has happened in several meetings over the last year, is when there is monitoring data and how to present this to the community, and what does that data tell us to make sure it's consistent with the modeling.
Yeah, and I can think of instances in recent years where, you know, we've tried to control things and reduce toxic emissions, especially metal facilities, and then we're surprised because there's some fugitive source that we didn't consider, and it happened with hexavalent chromium at the chrome platers. It's like, well, this isn't coming from stacks. This is, you know, sneaking out the door and the windows or whatever. And you know, with Exide, it wasn't something that we actually monitored and had a permit value on to. And so, in anticipation, and that's been the trend. Are there things that pop up in terms of source categories of types of facilities that we think have to be looked at in terms of fugitive emissions?
So there is a rule being worked on right now, 1430.1, that's on the rule forecast report for later on this year to come to board. That would be one of the types of facilities where this has come up. It's metal forging and grinding activities where you get fugitive emissions from there. 1420.2, which was recently adopted, that actually addresses fugitive emissions. So there are some rules that have been brought recently and are under consideration by staff right now. The main focus really has been on these, on the metals industry, but there's different types of activities with the metals industry that might produce fugitive emissions.
And it makes accurate emissions inventories difficult.
Sure, it definitely does. There's certainly other kinds of facilities that we're investigating for fugitive emissions, whether it's landfills like Sunshine Canyon Landfill. That's an issue we're looking at there. EPA has some new requirements for monitoring for benzene at refineries. So there are other areas where it is being looked at.
I would just add 1469 to that list is another rule we're looking at,
Which one's that?
the chrome platers,
Oh, the chrome.
and whether there should be some monitoring requirements or at least some things that kick in under certain circumstances.
I'll see if I can add to your first question.
Right.
There are a couple of local sensor deployment applications that we're experimenting with right now. And our sole purpose is to, precisely as you framed it, to develop the toolbox that we can share with the community that can be later used by them, and it's for PM purposes as well as for VOCs. And I can talk to you.
But not speciation of toxics within the VOCs.
We are not quite there. The technology is not quite there yet, but we predominantly want to use them to detect.
We all want our personal
trends.
GCMS we can carry around with us, plop it down.
Of course.
Our Star Trek tricorder, ready to go.
I think on our website, we have the AQ spec that shows different
Yeah.
types of sensors, capabilities.
Lockheed's gonna get us there. Thanks.
All right, any other board member questions? Public comment? No one jumping up? All right. Well, I think that's it for our main items. We're on to written reports, and then we have our notices. Under other business, I had a quick question. I know we've probably all been receiving a lot of emails from the Torrance refinery groups that are around that area and concerns, and really a sort of a way I look at it, somewhat of a well thought out request for some of the monies there in that area. Have staff come up with any response to that yet, or is that coming forward soon? Or
We're actually reviewing a lot of those comments. Motion, in fact, was able to respond to provide information, I would say, to the city of Torrance. And we're still looking at developing recommendations that we'll bring back to the committee and to the board.
In terms of how we
In
use
terms
the
of
penalty.
The money,
Yeah. Yes.
spent the money is
Right.
one thing, the study that we did is another.
Some of the number of pollutants that the community emails were asking were like in excess of 20 different pollutants. And not all of them are the type of pollutant you can continuously monitor and put it on a real-time basis on the website.
How close do you think you are to having a response to them?
I have a draft for you.
The other day? Okay,
Well, I'll
so-
be looking at the draft this afternoon, so we'll have a sense.
Sooner rather than later, if I'm asked.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. Glad to hear that's coming forward. Any other business by the committee? All right, with that, any other public comment? All right, no one's jumping up again. All right, we'll call this meeting to adjournment, and we'll be back here on July 22nd, 2016.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.